Hey guys, it's Trevor here again. Today we're going to be reading Hatchet by Gary Paulson. It's the reading series with me and Parker. So today we're going to see what happens in chapter 18. In chapter 17 we learned that Brian made a little canoe and a raft to get over to the plane but was unsuccessful. So let's see what happens in chapter 18 again. Brian worked around the tail of the plane 2 more times, pulling himself along on the stabilizer in the elevator, but there simply wasn't a way in. Stupid, he thought. I was stupid to think I could just come out here and get inside the plane. Nothing is that easy. Not out here. Not in the plane. Nothing is easy. He slammed his fist against the body of the plane, and to his complete surprise, the aluminum covering gave easily under his blow. He hit it again, and once more it bent and gave, and he found that even when he didn't strike it but just pushed it, it still moved. It was really, he thought, very thin aluminum skin over a kind of skeleton, and if it gave that easily, he might be able to force his way through. The hatchet, he might be able to cut or hack with the hatchet. He reached to his belt and pulled the hatchet out, picked the place where the aluminum gave to his push, and took an experimental swing at it. The hatchet cut through the aluminum as if it were soft cheese. He couldn't believe it. There were more hacks, and he had a triangular hole in the size of his hand, and he could see 4 cables that he guessed were the control cables going back to the tail, and he hit the skin of the plane with a frenzied series of hacks to make a larger opening, and he was still bending a piece of aluminum away from 2 aluminum braces of some kind which he had dropped. Where he dropped the hatchet. It went straight down past his legs. He felt it bump at his foot and then go on down in the water, and for a second he couldn't understand that he had done it. For all his time, all the living and fighting, the hatchet had been everything. He had always worn it. Without the hatchet, he had nothing. No fire, no tools, no weapons. He was nothing. The hatchet had been him. He had dropped it. Arrgh! He yelled it, choked on it, snarling of rage at his own carelessness. The hole in the plane was too small to use for anything, and now he didn't have a tool. That was the kind of thing I would have done before, he said to the lake, to the sky, to the trees, when I have came here. Now I've done it. Not now. I can't do it now. Yet he hung on the raft for a moment and felt sorry for himself, for his own stupidity. But as before, the self-pity didn't help, and he knew that he had only one course of action. He had to go get the hatchet. But how deep was it? In the deep end of the gem pool, he had no trouble getting to the bottom, and that was only 11 feet. Here it was impossible to know the exact depth. The front end of the plane, anchored by the weight of the engine, was obviously on the bottom, but it came up at the angle so the water wasn't as deep as the plane was long. He pulled himself out of the water so his chest could expand, took 2 deep breaths and swiveled down and dove, pulling his arms, kicking on the raft to the bottom of his feet. His first thrust took him down at a good 8 feet, but the visibility was only 5 feet beyond that, and he could not see the bottom yet. He clawed down 6 or 7 more feet, the pressure pushing in his ears until he had held his nose and popped them. Just as he ran out of breath and headed back up, he thought he saw the bottom, still 4 feet below his dive. He exploded out of the surface, bumping his head on the side of the elevator when he came up, and he took air like a whale, pushing the stale air out until he squeezed, taking new in. He would have to get deeper yet, and still have no time to search while he was down there. Stupid, he thought once more, crushing himself, just dumb. He pulled air again and again, pushing his chest out until he could not possibly get any more capacity. Then took one more deep lungful, wheeled, and dove again. This time he made an arrow out of his arm and used his legs to push off to the bottom of the raft. All he had in his legs, the spring snapped and propelled him down. As soon as he felt himself shoving it a little bit, he started raking back with his arms at his slides like paddles, and thrusting with legs like a frog. And this time he was so successful that he ran his face into the bottom mud. He shook his head to clear his eyes and looked around. The plane disappeared out and down in the front of him. He thought he could see the windows, and that made him think again of the pilot sitting inside, and he forced his thoughts from him. But he could see no hatchet. Bad air triggers were still starting to go off in his brain, and he knew he was limited to seconds now. But he held for a moment and tried to moving out a bit, and just as he ran out of air, knew that he was going to have to blow soon. He saw the handle sticking out of the mud. He made one grab, missed, reach again, and he felt his fingers close on the rubber. He clutched it and in one motion slammed his feet down in the mud and powered himself up, but his lungs were ready to explode, and he had flashes of color in his brain. Explosions of color, and he would have to take a pool of water, take it to his lungs, and as he opened his mouth, take it in, to pull in all the water with his lick. He had head blow out of the surface into the light. Sheesh! It was like a balloon had exploded. Old air blew out of his nose and mouth, and he pulled do it and again and again. He he reached out to the side of the raft and hung there, just breathing until he could dream once more. The hatchet clutched and shining into the right hand. All right, the plane, still the plane. He went back to the hole in the fuselage and began to chop and cut again, peeling the aluminum skin off in pieces. It was going slow because he was careful, very careful with the hatchet, but he hacked and pulled until he opened a large hole, put his head through his shoulders, and looked down in front of the water. It was very dark inside in the fuselage, and he could see nothing. Certainly no signs of a survival pack. There were some small pieces and bits of paper floating in the surface inside the plane. Dirt from the floor of the plane that had floated up, but nothing substantial. Well, he thought, did you expect it to be easy? So easy that way? Just open her up and get the pack, right? He would have to open it more, much more, so he could poke down inside and see what he could find. The survival pack had been zippered nylon bag, perhaps canvas of some kind, and he thought he had been red, or was it gray? Well, that didn't matter. It must have been moved when the plane crashed. He started chopping away, cutting the aluminum away in small triangles, putting each one on the raft as he chopped. He could never throw anything away, because he thought they might be useful later. Bits of metal, fish arrowheads, or lures, maybe. And when he finally finished again, he had cleaned away the whole side of the top of the fuselage that stuck out of the water, had cut into the water as far as he could reach, and had a hole almost as big as he was, except that it was crisscrossed with aluminum, where it might be to steel. He couldn't tell. Braces and formers and cables. It was an awful tangled mess, but after chopping away some braces away, there was no room had to wiggle through and get inside. He had held back for a moment, uncomfortable with the thought of getting inside the plane. What if the tail settled back to the bottom and he got caught and couldn't get out? It was a horrible thought, but then he reconsidered. The thing that had been up for 2 days, plus a bit, and he had been hammering and climbing on it, and hadn't gone back down. It seemed pretty solid. He eeled and threw the cables and formers, wiggled and pulling until he was inside the tail with his head clear of the surface of the water, and his legs down on the angled floor. When he was ready, he took a deep breath and pushed down along the floor with his legs, feeling for some kind of fabric or cloth, anything with his bare feet. He touched up, nothing but the floor plates. Up a new breath, then he reached down for formers underwater and pulled himself beneath the water, his legs pushing down almost to the backs of the front seats. And he finally, on the left side of the plane, he thought he felt his foot hit cloth or canvas. Up for more air, deep breathing, then one more grab at the formers and pushing as hard as he could, he jammed his feet down and he hit it again. Definitely canvas or heavy nylon. And this time when he pushed his foot, he felt something inside, something hard. It had to be the bag. Driven forward by the crash, it was jammed into the backs of the seat and caught on something. He tried to reach for it and pull, but it didn't have the air left and went up for more. Lungs filled in great gulps. He shot down again, pulling up on the formers until he was almost there, and then wheeling down. Head first, he grabbed at the cloth. It was the survival bag. He pulled and tore at it to loosen it, and just as it broke free, his heart leaped to feel it rise. He looked up. Above the bag, in the light coming through the slide, the pale green light from the water, he saw the pilot's head, only it wasn't the pilot's head any longer. The fish, he'd never really thought of it, but the fish had been eating it all this time. Had to eat too. He had been at the pilot all this time, almost 2 months, nibbling and chewing. All that remained was the not quite clean skull, and when he looked up, it wobbled loosely. Too much, too much. His mind screamed in horror, and he slammed back and was sick in the water. So sick that he choked on it and tried to breathe water, and he could have ended up there with the pilot where it almost ended, where they first arrived, except that his legs jerked. It was an instinctive fear more than anything else. Fear of what had been. But they jerked and pushed, and he was headed up when they jerked, and he shot to the surface, still inside the birdcage of formers and cables. His head slammed into a bracket as he cleared until he reached up and grabbed, and it was free, in the air, hanging up in the tail. He hung that way for several minutes, choking and heavy gasping for air, fighting to clear the picture of the pilot from his mind. And went slowly. He knew it would only completely leave, but he looked to the shore. There was trees and birds. The sun was getting low, and golden over his shelter. And when he stopped, coughing, he could hear the gentle sounds of evening and the peace sounds, the bird sounds, and the breeze in the trees. The peace finally came into him, and he settled his breathing. He was still a long way from being finished. He had a lot of work to do. The bag was floating next to him, but he had to get it out of the plane and onto the raft, then back to the shore. He wiggled out through the formers. It seemed harder than when he came in, and pulled the raft around. The bag fought him. It was almost as if it didn't want to leave the plane. He pulled and jerked, and still it wouldn't fit, and at last he had to change the shape of it, rearranging what was inside to pushing it and pulling it to the sides until he had narrowed it and made it longer. Even when it finally came in, it was difficult. He had to pull it first one side, then another, an inch at a time, squeezing it through. All of this took time, and when he finally got the bag out and tied on top of the raft, it was nearly dark. He was bone tired and from working in the water all day, chilled deep, and he still had to push the raft to shore. Many times he thought he would not make it with the added weight of the bag, which seemed to get heavier by the foot, coupled with the fact that he had getting weaker all the time. The raft seemed barely to move. He kicked and pulled and pushed, taking the shortest way straight back to shore, hanging to the rest many times, then surging again at it. It seemed to take forever, and when the last thing he felt hit the bottom, he could push against the mud and slide the raft onto the shore. Weeds to bump against the bank. He was so weak he couldn't stand, had to crawl. So tired he didn't even notice the mosquitoes that tore into him like a gray, angry cloud. He had done it. That's all he could think now. He had done it. He turned and sat on the bank with his legs in the water and pulled the bag ashore and began a long drag. He couldn't lift it. Back down to the shoreline, to the shelter. 2 hours, almost 3, he had dragged and stone in the dark, brushing the mosquitoes away, sometimes on his feet, more often to his knees. Finally, to drop across his bag and to sleep when he made to the sand in front of the doorway. He had done it. So, that was chapter 18. A lot happened. Brian actually made his way into the plane and found his survival bag after looking for a couple hours. He also found that the pilot was still in the plane, but the fish were eating it, so that disturbed him a little bit. But he made it back to his camp, and now he's going to see what's in the bag. So that was chapter 18 again. I appreciate you guys listening, and look forward to chapter 19 with Parker. Thank you.